Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reading Taking Hold by Francisco Jiménez. We're going to be reading chapter 10 and 11. Chapter 10 is called A Surprise, and if you're following along on the book, that is page 80. So let's go ahead and get started. I took a red-eye flight on American Airlines from San Francisco to New York City to begin my second year of graduate school. I had a miserable cold and a pounding headache, and having to be apart from my family and Laura for another year weighed on my heart. I took 2 aspirins, fell asleep, and had what was for me a frequently recurring dreams in which I was extremely tired from being on my knees picking strawberries alongside Roberto, my father, and other farm workers. Every time I tried to get up, I would collapse. My legs and arms felt like lead. I pleaded for help, but no one could hear me. The jolt of the airplane hitting the runway and groaning woke me up. It was 6:15 in the morning. I glanced out the window. The day was cloudy and gloomy. I picked up my suitcase, boarded a shuttle bus to the east side of East Side Airlines terminal on 37th Street, and took the subway up to Columbia. I checked in at the housing office in Hartley Hall and was reassigned to room 817 in John Jay. After reclaiming my belongings, which I had stored in the basement of the residence hall for the summer, I carried them to the elevator and up to my room. The old soiled green carpet in the hallways had been replaced with dark blue ones, and remnants of it were piled in the corner by the elevator. I picked up a large piece of carpet to use as a mat by the side of my bed, reminding me of how my family built a floor in our tent when we lived in Tent City by making frequent trips to the city dump to look for discarded lumber. My new dorm room was exactly the same size as the one I had the previous year, except this one was faced the campus with a view of the main quad in the west corner of the Hamilton Hall. Even though my room was comfortable, I decided to search for a less expensive place to live, one that had cooking facilities so that I could afford to buy Laura an engagement ring and help my family using money from my fellowship living stipend. I found a notice on a bulletin inside Butler Library advertising a furnished room with kitchen privileges 1 block from Columbia for $16 a week. Unfortunately, when I got there, the elderly couple who owned the apartment had already rented it. I felt discouraged and stopped looking when I discovered there was a penalty fee of $75 for breaking the contract with University Housing Office. Opting to stay in John Jay Hall and knowing that I would be breaking dorm rules, I went out and bought a single burner electric hot plate, a skillet, a can opener, utensils, and a couple of dishes, so that I could cook and eat 3 meals a day in my room. The year before, I'd limited myself to 2 meals a day, a cold cereal breakfast in my room and dinner in the school cafeteria. The third day after I had settled in, I brought some groceries and tried my chef skills. I closed the door and opened the window to air out the room. Then I chopped some onions, mixed them with ground beef and canned corn, and cooked the blend in the small frying pan. As I was preparing my meal, I sadly remembered my mother cooking verdolagas, wild spinach, outside our tent on a makeshift stove using rocks as a coma flat frying pan. When we first lived in Tent City, I was enjoying my dinner when I heard a soft knock on my door. I quickly gathered my cooking gear, hid it in the closet, and opened the door. To my relief, it was my next-door neighbor, Steve Winter, whom I had met the first day. He was short and slim with dark curly hair, brown eyes, and delicate hands with long, slender fingers. He spoke as if he were chewing his words. "Hi, mate," he said. "It smells bloody good. What are you cooking?" The odor of my delicious meal had obviously made its way to the hallway and into his room. When I explained what I was doing and why, he sympathized with me and told me that he too was on a tight budget. and had borrowed money to study for his master's degree in architecture at Columbia. He went on to say that after graduating from the University of Sydney with a bachelor's degree in architecture, he left home and moved to London, where he shared an apartment with his older sister and her boyfriend for a year. Since we both needed to economize, I invited him to join me in my venture and give him a taste of what I had cooked. This sloppy Joe tastes good, but let's add tomato sauce next time, he said. We both laughed and agreed to share the cooking and cleaning and to share expenses 50-50. Now I could afford to buy Laura an engagement ring. The next morning I went to Columbia's bookstore and asked a clerk where I might find bargains on diamond rings. She suggested taking the subway to Canal Street in Lower Manhattan. It's the jewelry trade center, she said. Canal Street reminded me of Midtown. It was lined with storefront jewelry stores and stores and sidewalk stalls crowded with tourists who jostled for space and bargained with vendors over handbags, perfumes, and sparkly watches. I went in and out of various stores, looking at hundreds of diamond rings and becoming increasingly confused. Many of them looking exactly the same, yet they differed in price. At each store, I was given a hard sell. None of the clerks seemed honest. Discouraged and tired, I continued my search until my storefronts on 70 to 72 Bowery, which intersected with Canal Street. Mr. Scholar, the owner, greeted me, and after I told him I was looking for an engagement ring, he pulled out a tray of diamond rings, neatly arranged in rows from under a display case. Placing it on the counter, he adjusted his black velvet kippah and proceeded to explain to me that the value of diamonds depended on size, clarity, color, and cut. How much are you thinking of spending? He asked. Between $100 and $200, I said. He smiled, took out another tray, picking out a beautiful diamond with a simple setting, and handed it to me. Laura would love this one, I thought. This is the finest ring we have in your price range, he said. It's a fine cut, 7/10 carat, and goes for $233, including tax. It's really a bargain. What about its clarity? I asked, noticing that he had not mentioned it. He examined it with a loupe magnifying glass. It has a small occlusion and imperfection, he said, but it's not visible to the eye. May I look at it? I asked. He handed me the magnifying glass and the ring. I inspected it closely and could see a thin, dark line cutting across the diamond. Like I said, it's not visible to the eye, he repeated. I told him I was interested in buying it, but not sure it was worth that price. He suggested that I pay for it and have it appraised at Emma Simpson Inc., a diamond and jewelry appraiser on Canal Street. If it's appraised for less than what you paid, come back and I'll give you the difference. Or you can return it and I'll give you your money back. I bought the ring and took it to 145th First Canal Street, where M. Simpson, the owner, appraised it for $375. He gave me an official certificate of appraisal, which he had signed. When I returned home, I read the disclaimer in fine print at the bottom of the certificate. No liability or responsibilities incurred by the appraiser in giving same. I immediately rushed to a jeweler store near Columbia and had it appraised again. The jeweler valued it at $350. I was relieved and pleased that evening. That evening, I wrote Laura a brief letter telling her to expect a small package in the mail. When you get it, please don't open it until I call you, I wrote. This is the following morning. I mailed both the letter and the ring to Laura's new address. She had moved into a one-bedroom apartment on 660th Main Street in Santa Clara, near the university. She had decided that it was more academically advantageous to get her Spanish teaching credential at the University of Santa Clara than at San Jose State. She shared the apartment with our friend, Trudy McCullough, who was studying for a high school teaching credential in math. 5 days later, I anxiously called Laura from the phone, both in Hartley Hall, hoping that by now she had received my letter and surprise package. Trudy answered the phone. I'm glad you called, she said in her deep, raspy voice. Laura's been on pins and needles since yesterday. Wondering what's in the box you sent her. And frankly, I am too. Here's Laura. Hi, it's good to hear your voice, Laura said. I miss you so much. I miss you too, I said, feeling my throat tighten. I hope you like what I got you. I'm dying to find out. I could hear her and feel her excitement. Open it, I responded, feeling proud of myself. I'm opening it, she said. There's a brief silence. Oh my gosh, she explained. It's beautiful. What a wonderful surprise. I'm glad you like it, I said. I'm sorry I wasn't able to give it to you before I left. I had to. You don't need to explain, she said politely. I understand. Besides, it was worth the wait. Her tone was sweet and empathetic. Thank you, I said. I feel very happy and peaceful inside. I do too. After we hung up, I went my room, thanked the Virgin de Guadalupe, and went to bed. I slept soundly that night. This is the end of chapter 10, and now we're going to continue to chapter 11. And in case you're wondering, it's on page 87. 87. And this chapter is called Concentration. Before classes started, I was received a notice from Professor Andres Duarte, informing me that he was officially my academic advisor and invited me to meet with him prior to registration to select courses and discuss topics for my master's thesis. I went to see him during his office hours on the third floor on Philosophy Hall. When I entered, he stood up from behind his desk and greeted me, and asked me to sit in a wooden chair next to him. His large, dark, rectangular office had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and in an oval window opposite the entrance, next to his wooden desk, which sat in the middle of the room, facing the door, was a black three-drawer metal file cabinet. I thanked him for being my advisor, and we discussed and agreed on the classes I should take that year, including two of his classes for the fall semester. The Spanish-American essay and directed research. He picked up a pen from his neat desk, signed my course schedule, handed it to me, and said, Now you have thought about a topic for your thesis? Something on Latin American literature, preferably Mexican, I responded. I'm not surprised, he said, but both are broad, rich fields from which to choose. You need to be more specific. I guess I need more time to think about it, I responded, after a brief moment of silence. That's fine, he said. Choose a topic that excites you, something you feel passionate about. I thanked him and agreed to meet with him again soon to finalize my choice. I had ample of material from which to pick. I had read works by many prominent Mexican and other Latin American writers. The previous year and during the summer, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, considered one of the greatest Mexican poets of the 17th century, Mexican writers Mariano Azuela, Nelly Campobello, and Martin Luis de Guzman, whose novels chronicle the Mexican Revolution. Gabriela Mistral had taught Spanish literature at Columbia. Miguel Angel Asturias, a Guatemalan novelist and a recipient of the Nobel Prize in Literature. The Argentine short story writer Jorge Luis Borges, and many others in my readings. I had discovered a preference for novels and short stories that depicted characters with whom I could identify. Peasants, Indians, and mestizos. I was drawn to literary works that dealt with themes of social justice and reflected the reality of Mexico and Latin America. After much reflection, I decided to write my thesis on the Indian in the novels of Gregorio y Lopez y Fuentes. I had written a paper in the novels of Gregorio Lopez y Fuentes. I had written a paper on the previous year on his classic novel, El Indio, for my course on the Mexican Revolution, and had found similarities between the Indian customs described in his work and my own family's way of life. In addition, I had picked strawberries in Santa Maria alongside braceros, a few of whom were Indians from rural parts in southern Mexico. I recalled that on my birthday, which I had to obtain after we got deported to Mexico. When I was 14, I was classified as indigenous, a term used by the Mexican census to report the cultural ethnicity of individuals. I met with Professor Eduarte a second time and told him of my decision. He thought the topic was an excellent choice and to help me with my research, gave me Fernando Benitez's Los Indios de Mexico and the Indians of Mexico and Frank Tenenbaum's The Mexico Agrarian Revolution and Mexico, The Struggle for Peace and Bread. He said that Benitez was the expert on Mexican and Indian cultures, and Tenenbaum was a well-known and respected historian of the Columbia faculty who had done research on rural education in Mexico for many years and had served as advisor to Mexican President Lazaro Cardenas. Before I left his office, Professor Duarte also asked that I give him an outline of my thesis before the end of the semester. I began working on the outlines, giving various master's theses in Butler Library on both Spanish Peninsular and Latin American authors to get an idea of what was expected. Every one of the essays contained an analysis of the author's life and works within a historical framework. Using them as a model, I wrote an outline and submitted it to my professor as a model. I wrote an outline and submitted it to Professor Eduarte. We discussed it the week before Thanksgiving break. Muy bien hecho, Panchito. It's very well done, he said. I cheered up. In his tone, I heard my father's voice. I missed him and the rest of my family so much. He glanced out the window, then looked straight into my eyes and said, I notice you get a little emotional sometimes when I call you Panchito and we talk about Mexico. I do, I said apologetically. I told him that my nickname connected me to my family and my childhood, and that I felt a strong bond to Mexico even though my family came to the United States when I was 4 years old. Es mi tierra natal, mi herencia cultural, pero también me siento ser americano. It's my native land, my culture, my heritage, but I also feel that I am American. I had become a naturalized American citizen only a few years earlier. Es natural que te sientas ser de dos culturas, eres mexicano y americano. It's natural to feel that you are a part of two cultures. You're Mexican and American, he said. ¿Y tus antepasados? What about your ancestors? I related to him that my paternal grandfather Hilario was a small farmer who died in 1910. When my father was a few months old, that my maternal grandfather Salvador Hernandez was a mule driver who chopped and sold wood for a living. And that, according to my tia Chana, my grandmothers were both very religious, humble, honest, and hardworking, as were my grandfathers. Así es nuestro pueblo. That's how our people are, he said proudly. He got up from behind his desk, picked up a book from the shelf, and handed it to me. This is Justo Sierra, Evolución Política del Pueblo Mexicano, Political Evolution of the Mexican People. It's for you to read and keep. I stood up and thanked him before I left his office. He gave me a hug and added, Mano a la obra, Panchito. Get to work. I felt fortunate and excited about having Andres Eduarte as my advisor and teacher, and about what I was learning. As I was Justo Sierra's History of Mexico, Gregorio Lopez y Fuentes novels, I became more troubled by the social, political, and economic injustices suffered by the Indians in Mexico. Since the Spanish conquest, and more aware of the need to value and incorporate their culture into the nation's life and identity. Lopez y Fuentes' work reminded me of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which I read in high school. It was the first literary work to which I could relate. In the course of the study for my master's, I became interested in the issue of race in Latin America. In the 19th century, as a result, I wrote the final paper for Andres Eduarde's Spanish-American essay class on Jose Marti, a Cuban essayist, poet, and journalist who devoted his entire life to freeing Cuba from Spain and to establishing a democracy without slavery. Unlike most of his contemporaries who claimed that Indians and blacks were inferior to whites, Marty believed in the equality of all races, he wrote. Anything that divides men from each other, that separates them, singles them out, or hems them, is a sin against humanity. His ideas of race were universal and timeless. Jose Marti and Gregorio Lopez y Fuentes influenced my own thinking about social justice and my heritage. I respected them and the other authors who used their writing talent to combat injustices in society. And that is the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Tune back in later.